I get this question a lot. What am I doing with Wellington Fund? Because with low interest rates, Wellington Fund has historically been a heavy, well, not heavy, but a third into bonds. And in the bond market, I am projecting won't give us much return going forward. So if we're going to use fixed income and discount the rates of return we're getting on fixed income, which I absolutely do, how do you then take the data from Wellington over the last 80 to 90 years, when those bond returns are extraordinarily high relative to where most of us think they'll be in the future? And that's a great question. So let me give you an example. In the Great Depression, literally a depression, not just a recession, a depression, you could still buy bonds paying 3 and 4%, 10-year treasuries. I don't know what corporates were doing, but the 10-year was still paying in a 3 and a 3.5 to up to, I guess, 3.5. So if you have a deflationary economy and you're getting 3, let's just say I have a 2% deflation, and then you get 3 on a 10-year treasury, that's a net 5% rate of return to you, which ain't too bad. And then you factor in very little taxes back then. That's actually a pretty good return. 5% in a depression when the markets were getting killed. All right. So then what I say is the problem with where we are today, and I don't know how any financial planner won't get this. It actually frustrates me if a financial planner isn't seeing this, to say, well, we're going to use the data from the past on the fixed income side and say historically this is what's happened. Yeah, but that's irrelevant, because with bonds, we know that there's basically a 95 to 99% correlation between future returns and your current yield. We know that. All right, this has been, I hate to say proven, because you can't prove anything in the future, but this has been established pretty thoroughly now, if that makes sense. So what I'm saying is, if we're getting 0.68% on the 10-year treasury, there's a 95 to 99% correlation between the idea that we're going to get 0.68 over the next 10 years. All right. So even during the Depression, we would have begun much better than we are now on just investing in bonds. So then but the Wellington invested in bonds, and if they were paying 3.5 on a 10-year treasury, they're probably paying much higher than on the corporate, which meant the Wellington did better in the depressionary times than what we'd expect now with bonds being so low. I hope that makes sense. So what do? You can't just pick and choose your numbers at Wellington. You got to use a real return. So what I'm doing when I'm writing my book on retiring Wellington Fund, I'm doing a barbell strategy, because I think that's the only way to go. In the barbell strategy I'm using, I'm having, hold on a second. Okay. I'm using the real Wellington funds going back to 1930. But for cash, I'm using zero interest. All right. So I'm saying, okay, we're going to give away the fact that I can't just change the Wellington fund returns. I can't. But I can also recognize that I don't think the Wellington bond side of the returns are going to be as high as they were during the Great Depression and whatnot, simply because we're not seeing that in the bond market now. And I talked to a video the other day where the Vanguard Intermediate Term Corporate Index, VCIT, is only yielding, 2.39 or something like that. And that's with a significant amount of BAA bonds, which is the lowest bond you can have to be still considered investment grade. So that's straight up ugly. All right, so if we're only getting 2.3 on intermediate corporate bonds, which is just shy of junk bonds, that's not good, especially when the average duration there is like 6, I think it was. So, all right, so what do? I say, okay, let's just take the Wellington returns. And I'm going to say, for instance, what I'm doing is I'm saying, let's say we have a 5% distribution rate. All right. So we're going to take 5% adjusted for inflation each and every year. We have $100,000 in our portfolio, for instance. So that means we're going to have 4 years of cash. I always say 3 to 5 years in cash. So in this case, I'm just going to round in the middle and say we got 4 years of cash. That means $20,000. So a $100,000 portfolio, $80,000 is going to Wellington, $20,000 is going to the cash, the barbell. All right. So now of the 20,000 that's going into the cash, it's not generating any return at all. Nothing. All right. So we're not getting any rate of return there. Come on, buddy. Which is about the best you can do, because if you're going to use the real returns of Wellington, given that the bond market was much better in literally until today, I think you have to give something away on your cash bucket, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'm saying no rates of return on cash, but I am going to take the real returns on Wellington. And the interesting thing is, again, I'm leaving a lot on the table, because just looking back at the 10-year Treasury, if you have no rates of return on cash, that's leaving 3.5% a year. And that's real money, all right? So it's about the best you can do. And I'll write more about this in the book, but I don't know what else you could do. Because if you change the numbers on the Wellington to assume that the bond rates are lower, then it's not real numbers. You're picking and choosing. And while you might be even doing that on a conservative basis, you can't then turn around and say retire on the Wellington fund, because it's fraudulent numbers. You're just making stuff up. And you could have the biggest, smartest guy in the world to do that, but it's still not real. You can't attribute that to Wellington. You can't. So that's about the best strategy I can find. And I think if you were to crunch some numbers too, with your own fixed income side, you should use no interest rate at all, because you're literally not getting that. Theoretically, you're getting 0.68 on the 10-year Treasury. If you want to use that, that's fine. But it just seems a little bit convoluted. So then what I'm doing, I'm going to keep doing that. And then even in the 66 to 82 time period, I'm going to keep doing that as well, because I'm not trying to say this is what happened. Isn't that great? I'm trying to say this is what happened, and this is what you can learn from it for your own device. And if we have a inflationary time like we did in 66 to 82, which I don't expect anytime soon, we still are right now dealing with no interest on bonds, if that makes sense. So because of that, I want to try to use not real world numbers, but a real world scenario that says, if this were to happen, hey, come on, buddy, then this is what you could expect potentially, just to give you some food for thought there. Now, I hope this makes sense. So stay tuned for the book. We'll see you.